Thank you very much. The title of this is Emotional and Spiritual Intelligence, What the World Needs Now. I thought about asking Michael to just sing that for us, what the world needs now. That's why the Healing the Heart of America series was started here at Unity of Houston, was because there was this heartache in the community about the amount of divisiveness and polarization that many of us are experiencing, and a desire to heal that. And so my feeling is that emotional and spiritual intelligence skills are going to be an important part of that. You know, we've had quite a series of events here at Unity Houston to try and address different pieces of it. But when Reverend Michael and I were talking about what skills do we need to do this work, one of the things that came up was emotional and spiritual intelligence. And because this topic is so huge, there are 18 skills of emotional intelligence I'll be exposing you to. There are 21 skills of spiritual intelligence, and we have this evening and tomorrow. It's like, yikes, how do we cut this down? And so the challenge I put to myself was, if this was the last workshop you could ever teach on this, and praise God it won't be, okay? But if this were the last chance you ever had to say what was most important about emotional intelligence and what was most important about spiritual intelligence, what would you teach? And that was the criteria I used to brutally throw out hundreds of options for slides and exercises and whatever, and try to distill it down to what I thought would bring you the most value tonight and tomorrow. So I hope you enjoy what we're about to see. Biography of me, for those of you who don't know me, I have a BA and an MA from Duke University, so I guess I qualify as a nerd. I was raised Roman Catholic, so that affects my worldview. One of the things we're going to be talking about is worldviews. I was also raised as an expatriate child for a lot of my childhood, which also affects my worldview. So one of the things we're going to be looking at are, what are all the things that affect how you see the world? And clearly my upbringing, my education are part of that. In terms of my work experience, I worked at ExxonMobil for 20 years in human resources, and I left to run my own businesses starting at the beginning of 2000. I actually quit on April Fool's Day, which probably says something, but I'm not sure quite what. I then created this thing called the Spiritual Intelligence Self-Assessment, the SQ21, which is your ability to assess yourself on where you think you are today on the 21 skills of spiritual intelligence. After years of creating and validating that, I wrote a book about the content once I felt like those 21 skills really actually did make sense. And that book, also called SQ21, came out in 2012. So other than that, I'm certified in a bunch of stuff, and I'm a Star Trek fan, and that's probably all you need to know. All right, let's move forward into the basics of what we're going to be approaching. You all, I'm sure, are familiar with the concept of the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule appears in all the major world religions, most of the major world philosophies, and it goes in one of two ways typically. Do unto others that which you would have them do unto you, or do not do unto others what you would not have done unto you. Okay? It's a very good place to start on how to treat people well. So in terms of walking our talk as spiritual beings, as human beings, as beings who love each other, this is not a bad place to start. There is a next step in this process, and it's often called the Platinum Rule, which is do unto others as they wish to be done unto, or some grammatically correct version of that. Now, you can see this most easily, I think, in gift giving. If you're giving gifts for birthdays or for any other Christmas, Hanukkah, any other holiday, do you select a gift that you would want to receive? Sometimes we do. And is it always well received by the other person? It may or may not be. So the best gifts you've ever received, I bet, were purchased for you with you in mind. Is that right? Not with the giver in mind. So the giver might really love, smelly bath salts, but I'm allergic to those things. So if you gave them to me, I'd be grateful, but I wouldn't be able to use them. I'd have to re-gift them, pass them on to someone else. So the Platinum Rule says maybe there's another step beyond, where we take the perspective of the other more fully into consideration. And that's kind of where we're heading. If we take it to the next level and we think about the religious upbringing that many of us in here have received, you might have been raised hearing about love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And that, as the greatest commandment, was something I took very seriously as a child and really wanted to live into. But I really didn't know how to live into that, right? Loving our neighbor can be hard work, and loving ourselves can be hard work. Does anyone else have an inner critic? Yes. Many of us have inner critics. So learning to do this can be very hard because other people are often annoying. And I'm often imperfect and annoy myself. So there's like all of this annoying going on. And right now we're in a situation where we're very almost disgusted with each other. Have you noticed that degree of intensity? Like, you voted for whom? You're in which party? You think what about this topic? And then we are disgusted and will not connect with the other. So loving the other is a really big challenge for us right now. And I think the health of our society depends on us finding a way to go forward with this. Now, a question that often comes up with this topic of loving my neighbor is, yes, but when I have to be nice to everybody, does that mean I can set boundaries with people? And the answer is absolutely yes, you can set boundaries with people. In fact, love requires that you do so. And so we're going to be talking about the distinction between empathy and compassion and fierce compassion. And what do those things mean? And how do you wisely and lovingly stand your ground and hold a boundary when you need to? Because that's what's called for in that moment. So love is not a wimpy thing. Spirituality, I don't think, is a wimpy thing. Spirituality and spiritual intelligence is actually far more demanding than that. It requires action. So the guiding question for me is, what is the loving thing to do? And we're going to begin and end with that because it keeps coming back to love. But love with a capital L, because it's the most divine understanding of love that we can attain. Understanding that we're imperfect. This is a photo I took when I was in Berlin a couple of years ago. They have these markers all over the place where they mark where the Berlin Wall used to be after World War II. And it's a symbol for them of the separation that was heartbreaking for them in that city, of separating East and West Berlin, East and West Germany, and the symbolism of the Cold War and the horrible times that there were. I think we're tiptoeing our way back into that kind of paranoid mindset. Fear is separating us. And so the question is there another way that we can be in the world that does not require us to put up walls between ourselves, physical, emotional, relational walls between people? All right, here's a quick overview of the content we're going to be covering tonight and tomorrow. It's a lot of material. I'm going to be quickly covering the 4 intelligences that we all need to be leaders and successful in our own lives. Whether that's successful at work or just successful personally, I believe these are the 4 intelligences you need. I'll touch on 2 of them very quickly. The other 2 I'm going to spend more time on. The 2 that we'll spend more time on are emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence. We're going to focus on 3 skills of emotional intelligence that you see here: emotional self-awareness, empathy, and emotional self-management. They're what Daniel Goleman at one point called the meta skills. They are not negotiable. If you want to have emotional intelligence, you must have those 3 skills. And then in spiritual intelligence, I selected some that I felt were most relevant for today. Skills 1 and skills 7 are both related to understanding worldviews, so we'll spend some time working on that. Skill 13, which is understanding and keeping your higher self in charge, understanding how to listen to it and how to let it run your life. And then skill 20, which is about being a calming and healing presence in the world. Does that sound like a good agenda? Good. We're going to start with an exercise. We're going to do as many exercises as possible. So there'll be lecture exercise, lecture exercise. So this is the first exercise, and you'll just do it at your tables for a moment, and then I'm going to capture your thoughts up here. So the first part of the question is, make a list of the names of people that you consider to be spiritual leaders. This is not, you don't take a vote or agree on this. Anybody can throw a name out. Somebody just be the scribe and write some stuff down. So names of spiritual leaders whom you admire. And the word admire is really crucial here. You must admire this person. These people can be alive or dead. They could even be fictional. They don't have to be perfect. And then the second question, after you guys have all put a couple names on the list, is list the character traits that cause you to admire these people. You'll be interested to know I've been asking this question for about 18 years now of different groups when I go around, and I find very consistent answers. I didn't do this while you were talking, right? This was done in advance. So other than Abraham Lincoln, you've got all of these folks. And you know, the names are slightly different from group to group, and sometimes it's what country I'm in at the time that I'm asking will affect the kinds of names that I'm getting. But what's really consistent beyond the list of names, and you can see there we've got quite a list of names to give you a further idea, and a lot of them like Thich Nhat Hanh are here. Sometimes relatives, sometimes teachers, like local religious leaders show up, congregant members, authors, and so on. But the characteristics are, to me, even more interesting than the names of the people. What is it that we're admiring about these people? And that, to me, is really informative. Look at how similar the list is. Loving, compassionate, humble, wise, courageous, faithful, forgiving, accepting, calm, centered, honesty, integrity, authenticity, peaceful, nonviolent, great teachers, able to inspire others, great leaders, persistent, selfless, sustaining faith, seeing the gifts inside of others and developing them. I'd say there's like a 80% or more overlap between your list and that list. So the same words keep coming up again and again. What this tells me is that while the field of spiritual intelligence is a relatively new field, we already know what is spiritually intelligent. We can recognize it when we see it. It just hasn't been really examined as a field of study and articulated very clearly. But we know it when we see it, and it's those kind of people that we admire. Now, I'm going to operate for the rest of this course from a core assumption that I suspect that we share, which is that the world needs more of all those character traits we just listed. Yes? Does anybody disagree with that? Okay, cool. So we're going to operate from that assumption. We'll launch now into talking about what are multiple intelligences, and then specifically what is EQ and SQ. These are the four intelligences that I work with the most. These are the four that I feel are essential, whether it's for your personal life or your work life, to be successful. Now, most of us are familiar with IQ or cognitive intelligence, and what this chart is showing you is that it's possible to be at different degrees of development on these four different levels of intelligence. So you could be highly developed cognitively and maybe not quite so developed on your interpersonal skills or your emotional intelligence. Does this ring true? Has anyone ever worked for someone who had a lot of IQ but not a lot of interpersonal skills? Right. Right. So I think we are all familiar with that reality, that you can be really brainy but not have good interpersonal skills. And how do you go about developing EQ will be part of what we talk about here today. Similarly, you can have a lot of IQ but not have a lot of SQ or spiritual intelligence. And you can be well developed on PQ or not well developed on PQ. That's physical intelligence, depending on the person. So this chart is a partial truth. The partial truth is that there is some freedom between these lines of intelligence to be well developed, medium developed, or not developed on these four lines of intelligence. It's also partially true that they are connected. So they're somewhat independent and they're somewhat connected as types of intelligences. This pyramid is designed to show you a different look at this topic, where we think about it in two different ways, one of which is developmental sequence. Here, PQ being at the bottom, physical intelligence or being aware of your body and able to be skillfully using your body, taking good care of it and being able to use it, first develops when we're babies, we're infants, and we're trying to learn to focus our eyes and lift our head and roll over and crawl and walk and run. It's not to say that infants aren't also developing their mental capacities. Of course they are. But the preschool years have a huge emphasis on body mastery. Then we go to school, and IQ tends to be the dominant focus of most schooling systems, unless you're in a pretty progressive Waldorf kind of Montessori, those kinds of schools where they intentionally focus on emotional intelligence. Most likely you're getting mostly IQ development. Now EQ happens naturally. People are developing it during the school years. But what we know about EQ from the research is that certain parts of the brain are involved. And those parts of the brain are not fully developed until we're 22 to 25. And the particular part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex, right here behind your forehead. And it explains so much about teenagers. Because the prefrontal cortex is not fully connected. The cells appear, they're laid down at about age 11, but they're not connected till about age 22 to 25. They get connected through usage. And it's the prefrontal cortex that allows you to anticipate the consequences of your behaviors. That failure is quite apparent sometimes at the teenage years, right? You're like, didn't you know that this would cause this? Well, no. So EQ, while you can certainly develop it in your teen years, is not fully available to us until we're 22 to 25. Now, that does not mean that just because you attain ages 22 to 25 that you gain emotional intelligence, right? So we've probably all met people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who still have not figured it out. So there is some effort required to develop emotional intelligence. Just because your brain is capable of it doesn't mean you will choose to do it. So there's some developmental sequence happening here. Then the fourth intelligence is spiritual intelligence. I show it as the top of the pyramid because it is my belief that until you start developing your emotional intelligence, it's really not possible to develop your spiritual intelligence, that these are tightly connected skills. And as we go through this today and tomorrow, I think it will become very clear to you that these are, in fact, tightly connected skills. So you have to develop your EQ in order to develop your SQ. But once you get started on this path, once you start building your SQ, these two become a virtuous loop where they reinforce each other. All right, let's talk about terms, because sometimes we think we know what a word means, but we don't actually know what it means. So the word intelligence has a specific meaning in the world of psychology, and it means mostly these two things. You can look up definitions on the internet and they get quite long, but these are the crucial bullet points. An intelligence is an innate potential that is brought into form through practice. An innate potential that is brought into form through practice. The illustration here is this little girl playing the piano. If she is born gifted musically, in other words, the potential is in her for tremendous musical intelligence, but she never touches an instrument and she never studies music theory, she will not bring it into form. Does that make sense? In the same way, just because you have emotions does not mean you are emotionally intelligent. They are a set of skills that need to be brought into form through practice. I also believe that all humans are born innately spiritual. I'll define that term in a few minutes. But because we're born spiritual does not mean we are born spiritually intelligent. It is a set of skills brought into form through practice. Now, the second bullet is, why does Mother Nature predispose us for certain intelligences? And the belief is there has to be some adaptive reason for it. It's giving us something that is helpful. So the way they say that is adeptness or appropriately reasoned behaviors and responses, meaning something that's helpful, something that's good for us. So that's what an intelligence is in the world of psychology. People argue whether there are 8 or 10 or 12 intelligences. You're welcome to investigate that field if you find it interesting. If you do find the field interesting, I would start with the work of Dr. Howard Gardner. His research, I think, is 7 or 8 intelligences as of right now. All right, that's intelligence. What is spirituality? I said I believe that all human beings are innately spiritual, and I've kind of modified or created this definition for myself because I needed something short enough to remember, and because I really like the work of Abraham Maslow. And so this is kind of an homage to Maslow, that spirituality is an innate human need to be connected to something larger than ourselves, something that we consider to be sacred or noble, or you might prefer the word divine. Being generous with synonyms is part of this process. People can get very hung up on their specific words. And so I try to encourage flexibility wherever we can around the use of words that mean similar things so that you can bring your preferred words to this conversation. So that's what I mean by spirituality. How is spirituality different from religion? This is the thing I have to deal with immediately whenever I'm dealing with this topic inside of a corporate setting, because people are just immediately fearful that I'm talking about some kind of conversion to a religion. And so I have to quickly say, look, this is about spiritual intelligence, and let me define my terms. Here's what I mean by spirituality. Here's what I mean by religion. Religion is a smaller term than spirituality. All human beings are spiritual. Some human beings are religious. Religious people participate in a religion. A religion is made up of certain things. It's a structure that can help us fulfill our spiritual needs, and that structure usually includes, not necessarily, but usually includes a founder. It includes sacred texts. It includes sacred places. It includes physical facilities, congregations, rituals, and practices. Does that make sense? Okay, so everybody, I believe, is innately spiritual. Some people are religious. Spiritual intelligence is something different. It's a set of skills that you can develop no matter whether you're spiritual or religious or atheist or agnostic. It does not matter. Okay? So let's get to spiritual intelligence. When I was looking at these spiritual leaders and thinking about what made them different, what made them more than just emotionally intelligent, there was clearly something more about these people. They weren't just high IQ, they weren't just high EQ, there was something different. And initially I was going to say these people behave with love. But the word love in English is a problematic word. It is a very sloppy word. We use it to mean many things. We say, I love my children and I love pizza. Now, maybe for you those are the same things, but for me those are vastly different experiences. So I toyed with using agape and philia and eros and that kind of language, but I find it off-putting for a lot of people. It seems very academic and hard to grasp. So I went searching for a better explanation of what is love, and I found a parable from the Eastern traditions that says love is a bird with two wings. One wing is wisdom, the other wing is compassion. If either wing is broken, the bird cannot fly. And to this day, it gives me goosebumps when I say that. You might call them truth bumps. It's like, oh, there's something really important there. The best of the heart, compassion, the best of the mind, wisdom coming together in loving action. That is the essence of spiritual intelligence. So how do I take that and put it into a definition? So here's the definition I came up with. That spiritual intelligence is the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace, regardless of the situation. So breaking that into pieces, the ability to behave, the word behave is crucial. You may have found in your own life that it is much easier to love other people when they are not around you. I forgive you, I love you, I bless you. Oh, you're here. So the word behave is pretty crucial to this. Can you show up with this in your behaviors, not just as a theory? Wisdom and compassion, the two wings of a bird, love, while maintaining inner and outer peace, also known as equanimity in the spiritual literature. Now, why the inner and outer? You can have the facade of outer peace by willpower. And that's an improvement over screaming at people or doing worse, right? So if all you can get is outer peace, good for you, go for that. Yes, calm on the outside. But if you're calm on the inside, you don't have to use willpower to be calm on the outside. Because you've sort of rooted out the perspectives and beliefs that are causing you to have all this upset, you can stay in a place of calmness, which is far more sustainable. Right? So these leaders that are able to sustain loving behavior in the face of incredible stress have to be coming from that place where they've done the deep inner work to get rid of beliefs that are obstructing their ability to see other people with love. Does that all make sense? If that's not the work of a lifetime, I don't know what is. Now, I like to say I teach what I need to learn. So please understand, I'm not claiming to have achieved enlightenment and be able to do all the stuff that I'm teaching you. But I will tell you that this has been the stuff that's been the most helpful to me as I'm trying to make this journey for myself. All right, so I mentioned that there are 4 intelligences and that EQ and SQ interact. And that's really important to know, that you have to have this little bit of EQ to get started. And it's why I pretty much don't teach spiritual intelligence in isolation anymore. I always teach it with emotional intelligence, because if that's not there as a foundation, you can't build a good house on top of it. So the EQ has to be there enough to start the SQ work, and then those two can act like jet fuel for each other and just really accelerate the process. So what is emotional intelligence? This is Daniel Goleman's definition. Daniel Goleman is one of the gods in the emotional intelligence world. I recommend anything he's written. So really seriously, anything he's written is worth looking at. The one thing I'm not crazy about is this, because I can't remember it. It's a little too long. So it's academically correct, but a little hard to remember. So I'm going to read it off the screen. Emotional intelligence is the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those of others, for motivating ourselves, for managing emotions well in ourselves and in our relationships. You understand why that's hard to remember? Yeah. So the shortcut is good social skills, or good interpersonal skills, or good relationship skills, which come from a series of many skills, which I'm going to show you as we get to it. So, tying this all together, spiritual intelligence. You can think of the shortcut is that spiritual intelligence is like emotional intelligence on steroids, right? Big muscles, right? So you get the EQ muscles, and then you build the really big muscles from that when you build your spiritual intelligence. If you have no emotional intelligence, you cannot have sustainable spiritual intelligence. So those two must go together. And that spiritual intelligence will then amplify and coordinate all of your other intelligences. So the ability to be calm in the moment is a powerful amplifier of your IQ. Because if you're not calm, your brain's running all over the place and you're not going to make good decisions. If you're able to really be spiritually intelligent, you will want to take better care of your body, because your body will support you. Have you ever noticed that if you're really tired and you haven't eaten and your blood sugar's low, that you get cranky? Right. So it's hard to be emotionally and spiritually intelligent if you're not taking good care of your body. And so I think as you work on these, you start realizing, I have to take care of my body in order to be the human I want to be in the world. Doesn't mean you have to be an Olympic athlete, but get some sleep, all of that stuff. Right. All right, so it's time for another exercise. I've talked long enough. So we're going to do 2 questions. And the first one, and you're going to do this at your table and just brainstorm a little bit. What do you dislike about Houston? Now, those of you who are spiritual and positive-minded are not going to want to do this exercise. So I am giving you permission to let your whiny, victim, complainy self come out. And for the next 2 or 3 minutes, just jot down things that you don't like about Houston, okay? So complain, I want to hear it. Write it down. So as you look at this list, if you were just to contemplate this all day long, what kind of feelings would you have about Houston?
Depressed.
You'd be depressed. I want you to name some feelings. Seriously, you'd be depressed.
Despair.
You'd despair, tense, angry, stressed, frustrated, anxiety, sad. Why am I living here, right? I want to move, right? So your emotions would start to be affected by this perspective. Okay, so now we're going to take your suggestion. Let's do the opposite, and we can just do this by popcorn. Give me some stuff that you love about Houston.
People.
People.
Ethnic food.
Ethnic food. We got food, man. We are a food capital. Diversity.
Get her done attitude.
Get her done.
Opportunities.
Opportunities.
No.
No snow.
Culture.
Culture.
Theater district.
Culture, arts, theater district.
The Rockets.
Cost of living.
The Astros.
Astros, Rockets. So, how do you feel now? Happy. Could you be like Chamber of Commerce for Houston right now? Like totally. Move to Houston. This is a great place to live. So this is 101 on emotional intelligence. The stuff you think about creates the stuff you feel. It's also a lot of basic spiritual principle, right? What you focus on expands. So there's a lot of overlap here between these two things. All right. So you've just demonstrated something important to yourself. So we're going back to the intelligences now. And I'm going to give you just like 30 seconds on physical intelligence, maybe a little more. But what do you need to know about physical intelligence? Sleep. Get enough of it. It's really, really important for your immune system, for your stress, for your brain health, everything. Exercise. Try to get some movement in every day if you possibly can. Sitting is deadly if you sit too much. Watch your diet. Try not to eat too much garbage. Take care of yourself biochemically. There are some emotions which are purely biochemically triggered, and we have to just honor that. The people who have mood swings may have biochemical basis for that. Those of us who have had to endure the joys and pleasures of menopause can swear to some of the emotional changes that come with that. God bless my husband for, that little roller coaster experience. So, Pregnancy hormones, right, yes. So, hormonal changes, neurochemical changes, dietary changes can also impact your mood. So we need to be realistic that it's not all just what you think about. It can also be in your body. So taking care of your biochemical stuff when you know you have those things to balance yourself when you can. Stretch, flexibility in the body can lead to flexibility in the mind, and have some fun and play in your life. So that's all you get on physical today. The rest you have to take care of yourself. But that's important. That's the foundation. So don't forget about that. That's the bottom of the pyramid. IQ development matters, all right? There are people who teach emotional intelligence who slightly misrepresent the research, and it's not intentional. I think they just don't word it properly. But they'll say it's not IQ that makes you successful, it's EQ. And that's not exactly what the research says. In fact, that's definitely not what the research says. IQ is an important part of your success in your life. IQ development is what gets you into a position. And IQ, maintaining your ability to think logically and your technical skills, will keep you employed. So staying up with your IQ stuff matters. But also, logic and problem solving is good for complex times. We are in complex times. If you can calm yourself enough to use your logic and problem solving skills, that will be a great boon to yourself and to our nation. So logic is fantastic. One of the challenges here, though, is that we tend to, let me put this down, we tend to think that we're logical when we're often not. So the way the brain works, and I think I have a brain slide coming up here shortly, is that we have this older part of the brain which is represented by my fist and my arm. So this is like the brain stem and the limbic system. And this is the neocortex, a newer portion of the brain that sits on top. We believe we are making all of our decisions from our neocortex. But what the research shows us is that most of our decisions are actually being made in the limbic system, in our emotional and intuitive and instinctive center. And so a lot of self-mastery is required to calm the limbic system and bring the neocortex online. So good policy decisions in a democracy where we're making those choices together mean we need to calm our limbic system and bring our neocortex back online. All right, so that's all you get on IQ. Well, not quite. One more slide. Which line is longer, looking at this? You guys have seen this before. You're too smart. So the first time you saw this, did it fool you for a moment? Okay. So the first time you see this, which one do you think is longer? A looks longer. But you know that's incorrect. So you know there's a perceptual problem. Like the brain is perceiving something as longer because of its context, right? The lines on the end of the A make it look longer. The lines going that way on the B make it look shorter, right? Does this mean that maybe you're wrong about other stuff that you look at? Right, yes. Maybe. So this is another potential value of calming our limbic system and really developing good logic and problem solving, is that we can test our own assumptions, which are often not correct. So using good scientific method can be a really helpful thing in our own personal growth and development. We'll come back to that later. There's a metaphor around, oh, I forgot my elephant. Let me get my elephant. That has been circulating because of this book by Jonathan Haidt called The Righteous Mind. And it's about why good people disagree on politics and religion. And it's a fabulous book. I highly recommend it. And he talks about this metaphor of the elephant and the rider. And the elephant is your limbic system, or your instinctive, intuitive, emotional decision making. And this little rider on top is your neocortex. Now, if the elephant decides to go somewhere, who's going to override the elephant? Do you think this little rider is going to control the elephant? No. What the research shows us is when we're upset, and there's a lot of people been upset in this country for a couple of years now, when we're upset, the elephant is running the show. We are making decisions at an instinctive, gut, emotional level. And the purpose of the neocortex at that point becomes to rationalize the choices that the elephant has made. We use our neocortex as our press agent, our public relations person, to explain our decisions, not to challenge them. All right?
What book did that come from?
Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, Haidt, yeah, H-A-I-D-T. And it's called The Righteous Mind. How good people disagree on politics and religion, or something very close to that. And in that book, he talks a lot about how humans actually work. In theory, we like to think we're logical. In reality, we are not. But if we want to be more logical, what would be required of us would be to calm the elephants down. And this is not meant to be a symbol of the GOP or the Republicans at this point. This is just a big animal, okay? So he's just using this to represent a really big animal not being able to be controlled by the rider. And my elephant and your elephant, if we are clashing, it's going to be very difficult to manage the situation. So the bottom line, he says, in terms of reducing political polarization, is getting the elephants to talk to each other. It's not getting the riders to talk at this point. The elephants have to calm down and begin to connect. And so building relationships is going to be where we're going to end tomorrow. All of this is going to build to how do we bridge across the aisle, across religions, across whatever our differences are, to build relationships. Because once the elephants start leaning towards each other, then the riders start rationalizing why they agree. Instead of finding all the reasons why I can't stand you, they start finding reasons why I really like you. And then they start looking for ways to live together more harmoniously. So it's an important metaphor, the elephant and the rider. All right, we're going to move from IQ into EQ with this transitional slide where I'm going to repeat that IQ matters, and it matters a lot. It is a necessary part of getting you into a career. There's like a minimum threshold of technical skills required for any job, bus driver, picket, neurosurgeon, whatever it is, there's a minimum threshold to get in the door. Once you've unlocked it and walked through the door, Now it's a pretty level playing field because everyone else you're working with has crossed that same threshold. Does that make sense? So at that point, emotional intelligence becomes the differentiator. So very bright people working together, those who have emotional intelligence will rise above those who do not, generally speaking. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's how that works. So what is emotional intelligence? You have as one of your handouts, I'm going to steal yours for just a moment so I can hold it up if you don't mind, a two-sided piece of paper that looks like this. All right? On one side it says emotional competence framework, and this is the emotional intelligence model I work from most of the time. Does everybody have this little two-sided? And the other side is the spiritual intelligence. We're going to start with emotional intelligence. So the emotional intelligence model has 4 quadrants. The first up here is self-awareness. And I'm going to get into which skills go in that quadrant in a moment. But I'm just going to say you start with emotional intelligence in the upper left, the self-awareness quadrant. You then go to the social awareness quadrant, and you see both of these are awareness quadrants. Both of these going this way are self-focused. Both of these are other-focused. All right? So you start up here with self-awareness, and then you see there are 2 yellow arrows going out from there. From self-awareness, you can then develop social awareness. From self-awareness, you can then develop self-management. And those 3 quadrants feed into the bottom right quadrant, which is sometimes shown as relationship skills and sometimes shown as social skills. Either one, doesn't matter which one. It is from good social skills that you are able to have positive impacts on other people. You follow the train here? All right, so looking at the one that you have, you see the self-awareness quadrant in the upper left contains 3 skills. Now this is the model as they were using it in 2002. There have been numerous iterations of the model, so I just kind of have to put a pin in what year I'm using here. But I will tell you the 3 skills that we're talking about haven't changed. So no matter what's changed about the model, the 3 that we're focusing on has not changed. So the first one listed is emotional self-awareness. This means I can name my emotion at the time that it occurs, and I understand what triggered it. And you're going to see this in more detail in a moment, so you don't have to remember that. But you notice I've turned it yellow. It's one of the 3 meta skills, the non-negotiable, gotta have them, emotional intelligence skills. Over here, under social awareness, the first skill listed is empathy, and that means that I am accurately able to guess or read your emotional state. All right? I have appropriate empathy with you. We're going to talk more about empathy as well. And then down here, the first skill in self-management is emotional self-control, sometimes also just called emotional self-management. So emotional self-control means that I can keep a grip on myself when I'm upset. I don't just blurt stuff out. I don't just do stuff that I'm going to regret later. So the connection here, if I have no clue when I'm angry, in fact, I deny that I'm angry. I just sort of stuff it, right? Is it likely to squirt out later, kind of uncontrolled down here? Yeah. So if I'm not aware that I'm building up anger, I can't appropriately manage that. If I am not aware of my own emotions, how likely am I going to be to read your emotions correctly? Not very good, right? So if I don't know when I'm angry, I don't know when you're angry, I don't manage my anger well, how am I going to be at conflict management? Terrible, very poor, right. So it intuitively makes sense, right, that these 3 yellow-colored skills, these meta skills, would be related actually to everything in the lower right-hand quadrant. So it's super important to be able to develop those 3 skills. We're going to start by working on the first one, emotional self-awareness. You have an exercise, the paper should be white, stapled together, and look like this. And it says building emotional self-awareness. And it begins with this ridiculous long list of emotions words. So let me tell you where this came from. When I was in my 20s and going through my first divorce, I'll tell you, I'm on my third marriage, and I do think I have finally figured out how to do this thing. You have to check in with my husband to see if he agrees. But when I was going through my first divorce, I got into therapy, because I wanted to figure out like where I went wrong and make a better decision the next time, right? Because it was clearly I picked the wrong guy. That was obviously the problem. And, maybe I did, but there was a lot that I needed to work on, which, guess what? Came up in the therapy. So, my therapist would ask me questions like, well, Cindy, tell me what happened, and blah, blah, blah. And then he would say, well, how do you feel about that? And my answer would be, I think, blah, blah, blah. And he would say, I didn't ask you what you thought, I asked you what you felt. And I would look at him with this very quizzical look, and I'd go, I don't have any feelings about that. That's just the facts. That's what happened. He'd go, okay, see you next week. Now, when I figured out this was going to be a weekly test, I decided I was not going to fail it. I went to Duke, I know how to pass tests. So I went home and I started a list of emotions words, because clearly that was the correct answer to the question. How do you feel about that? Needed a feeling word answer. So I wrote, back then we didn't have Excel or anything, so I ended up later putting it in a Lotus spreadsheet. Lotus was the big breakthrough at the time in software. But I wrote down every word I could find and alphabetized that thing. And before I went to therapy, I would circle a word. And I would go in and I would say, I am anxious about that. A word. Now, that's entirely true, as embarrassing as it is, but that list was a breakthrough for me, because over time I got better and better and I didn't need the list. But initially I needed the list very much to get me started. And over time what I found was I could name it faster. And my therapist was to the point where he's saying, one of these days you're going to have a real-time emotion. And like in that moment, you're not going to have to think about it 2 hours later. You're going to get it right that moment. And I remember the day it happened. It's like, I'm angry. Wow, I got it. I understand what it is. But that's kind of where we're heading. I've been an executive coach for years now, and this is the first exercise I use with almost every client, because I need to find out how good is their emotional vocabulary. All right, so that's why this list is ridiculously long. And trust me, there are words that are missing from this list. So as you go through this and you're going to list your emotions from today, you may find that there are words that you would want to use that are not on the list. You use whatever word you like. But the exercise, there's some instructions at the bottom of page 3, is that you're going to list as many emotions as you can. It doesn't matter if emotions contradict each other. It doesn't matter if you're repeating a word, but if you are repeating a word, you might want to think about it a little bit more. And at the bottom it says, please consult a qualified therapist if you find you have persistent feelings of sadness, anger, or thoughts which scare you, which is a serious recommendation. I am a huge fan of therapy. I have been in and out of therapy on and off for most of my adult life, and I attribute my EQ and SQ abilities in large part to the work I've done in self-awareness in therapy. So that was a serious thought there. All right, so then when you get to page 4, you see the daily worksheet. Here you're going to just put today's date, which is Friday, March 23rd, and then you will say, when I woke up this morning, I was feeling blank and blank. And underneath of it, you can put a note about what was happening, like alarm didn't go off, whatever it was, because it may be related to the emotion that you were experiencing. So we're going to take, a few minutes in silence. I'll walk around and check on people and see when most people are done, but I'd like you to complete this whole thing up until right now. All right? Was this difficult or easy for you guys? Some people say difficult, some people say easy, right? So some people were flipping through the words list. Was the word list helpful?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Were you kind of surprised at some of the words on the list, or some of the words that you picked from the list? Yeah, maybe, yes, no, okay. There's a lot of words on that list. And there's a lot of words missing from that list. There's actually quite a rich vocabulary out there for emotional intelligence, for emotions words. So here are some of the patterns that I would suggest you look for as you're looking through your sheet, and then make copies of the blank one. You have a blank one right after that. Just make copies of that as you need to and keep working on it. I recommend doing at least 7 days in a row if you can. And look to see if there's a time of day pattern. I had one client who was always reporting irritable mid-morning, like getting into arguments with people mid-morning. And that was one of the things his boss had sent him to coaching for, was to get a grip on his temper. So I asked him, when do you get up? And it turned out he got up super early. He would go running. He would have breakfast at like 5 in the morning, and then he wouldn't eat again till noon. And these incidents were all happening around 10 in the morning. So the solution was eat something. Right, sometimes this is not super complicated, right? Almonds in the desk could solve the problem. So look for any patterns that you're seeing. Look for any repeating emotions. Sometimes people will use a word like upset, and that'll be upset, upset, upset. Well, what do you mean by upset? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? Are you angry? And so like try to get a better word, because a more descriptive word will then help us look more deeply for the trigger. What is the thought behind the emotion? So there's an assumption, an interpretation of life, of what's happening in the day, that you're interpreting that as a bad thing or a frustrating thing or whatever, but we can't get at it if we're not finding the right word yet. So looking to find the right word. Other books that are helpful. This book is called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's not an expensive book. It's easily available, very affordable. And I think it's on page 15. They have a lovely little table for people who find my table hard to work with that looks like this. Now, it's very simplified, but it's very helpful. And what it has is happy, sad, angry, afraid, and ashamed as the column headers, and then degrees of intensity from high to low going down. So if you know you're somewhere in the happy category, but you're not quite sure, you might be anywhere from elated, overjoyed, exuberant, or ecstatic, down to glad, content, pleasant, tender, pleased, mellow. Right? So this is also a really cool little table. This book has a whole lot of advice for developing emotional self-awareness, little tips that are easy to read. All the categories of the basic emotional intelligence they cover in here. And in the back is an orange envelope with a passcode to take their online emotional intelligence self-assessment. Tomorrow we're going to pick up with the second of the emotional intelligence skills, which is emotional self-management. And we're going to talk about the drama triangle and victims and persecutors and hero rescuers and how we get caught up in all our own stuff. And how much fun that is. What we think creates a lot of our emotions. And a lot of what we think is not accurate. It's an assumption or it's an interpretation, often one that serves the drama triangle, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. Serves to kind of like make for a really good story about how I got victimized by this jerk at work. But that story is robbing my life of joy. And so the more we're in the drama triangle, the more we are taking away our power from ourselves and our joy from our life.
I was just curious about the inner peace, because for a while before I heard you say it, I really did think I had inner peace. But basically, I just mastered like the discipline of not reacting physically or expressing it. But things still tear me up inside to this day. So I was just wondering if you didn't mind elaborating on inner peace a little bit.
Inner peace, right. So I will tell you, your description of yourself mirrors my description of myself. So I grew up idolizing Mr. Spock from Star Trek, okay? And Vulcans and logic, and, you know, I grew up during the Cold War and really fearful of nuclear war, and thinking that the only way we were going to make it as a species is if we got logical. And so for me, I bought into the whole emotions are bad, logic is good. And so this sort of self-disciplined self that was very self-deluding, right, that I'm not angry, right, which was a phony story. I was telling myself I was squashing those feelings. So it was years later in the therapeutic process where I started uncovering things that I really was angry about and realizing that was okay, but there were healthy and unhealthy ways to deal with that. To get to the place of inner peace is not to say you'll never be angry again, because I think anger is a healthy emotion that indicates the time has come to set a boundary. And so if you're having an anger response, it may be really important information to not do some kind of spiritual mojo on to try and get rid of. It may be really important to keep that feeling as the energy you need to take action in the world. Right? And that's when we talk about fierce compassion tomorrow. We're going to talk about that. But a lot of the stuff we get angry about is dumb. And when we get angry about dumb stuff, we're wasting our lives. And we're hurting ourselves and our relationships. Right? So finding the wisdom to see clearly, or more clearly, because we're never perfect at this, when this is a story I've cooked up that is from my ego, and it's self-serving in a negative self-serving kind of way. And then learning how to purge that. And that is the work of spiritual intelligence, and it's really heavy lifting. But when you get to that place where you can identify the ego's voice pretty quickly and learn to shift to the voice of your higher self, it's just such a relief. And it's not that you can do it every day or every minute, but I look at SQ as what percentage of the day can I come from this place of love? You know, like of being a spiritually intelligent person, wisdom, compassion, inner and outer peace. And if I can even get close to 50% of a day, that is a rockin' good day, right? So I don't see it as being perfect. I see it as a constant effort. Some days I'm only 10%, some days I'm 1%. But some days maybe I get it all the way up to 50% or more of the day, and it's like, I'm so grateful for the practice that got me here. Does that help you? Good. Thank you. Great question.